Welcome back, and today we'll build a dio base from start to finish. So we start off with the frame, and I'm using just some Tasmanian oak moulding and some Tasmanian oak square timber to build up the frame. I want this dio to fill up the entire shelf section, so it's very specific measurements, 76.5 in width and 27.5 in depth, so that's centimetres. And this was the first good hit out for the Proxon miter saw, so I wanted to do the corners as 45-degree joins, and it worked out reasonably well. So this is all the pieces laid out on the bench. Very happy with the corner joins, they came together very well. And this is the plastic core flute, which is super light and super strong. So I've used this a couple of times now, and just a matter of making sure you cut it nice and square to the dimensions. And here it is slipped in to the frame, and with the smaller rails on the inside, which fundamentally stick the plastic to the bottom of those rails and the side of those rails to the moulded frame. Holds it all together. Now, you wouldn't go into any construction project without a good plan, and I made sure I spent some time and designed a very careful plan to make sure the build went very smoothly. And now just doing the roughing out with the foam. So I'm an avid collector of foam, and all my family know that, so anytime anyone gets something that is packaged in foam, they save all the good flat bits for me, and I have a very substantial collection of foam in the garage. I used liquid nails to do the timber and the plastic core flute. It's a sort of general purpose building glue that sticks pretty much anything to anything, which is quite good. And then stole a trick from Simon Kemp and used Glad Wrap to make sure that nothing got stuck to the wrong places. Needed a square to make sure everything was nice and tidy and my 45-degree angles didn't go off as I started gluing. And just secured the square to the bench so it was firm and wasn't wobbling around. Just lightly smear on the glue. It doesn't need a hell of a lot to make a good contact. And then once I got the front and the two sides on, slipped the core flute in just to make sure it was square and that it fitted correctly. And then I put the back on and discovered it had some warpage in it, which was a bit disconcerting, and it just meant that the ends didn't really line up together very well, and it was a little bit raised at one end, so I had to get a bit medieval with it and get the G-clamps onto it, and kept it clamped to the bench for about 48 hours. Probably didn't need that long, but I just didn't get back to it, and seemed little point to undo it before I was ready to go on to the next step. And that largely resolved the warpage, although it did leave me with a couple of little gaps. They weren't sort of like the holy mother of all gaps that had to be dealt with, but just filled them largely with the glue, and just careful to wipe off the excess so it doesn't affect the staining later on. So next I just joined the core flute to the picture frame, the moulded timber, with the small square Tasmanian oak timber. Pretty much see what's going on here, so I'll just leave you with some music. This is the same stain that I always use. I just bought a little sample bottle from the hardware shop. I think it was only about $4, I think. and that's done half a dozen frames so far. So don't use a lot. Typically would give 2 to 3 coats depending upon the timber and how it is absorbing the stain. But it goes on pretty easily, and just have to be careful that you don't let it pool or run. In between coats, I will give it a very light sand, only with the very finest grain sandpaper and very, very light. It just gets any fluff or dust or bits of rubbish that might have jumped onto it while it's been drying in between coats. I always like to put green felt on the base. I think it helps them slide in and out of the shelves much easier. Other than that, it's probably largely pointless because no one can see it. I just use the spray adhesive, the photographer's spray adhesive, which works very well. It's the first time I've tried it on this one. Usually I've used PVA, but that can make the felt become quite hard as it dries if you put too much. So this was much better and worked much easier. I had a little bit of a shortfall, but given that it was at the back and no one was going to see it, I thought I'd just fill it in with some extra felt from the side ends, and overall it looks pretty good. So the next thing to do is to glue the foam down to the base, and that just required a little bit of carving around the edges just to accommodate the lip that's formed from the inside when putting the frame together. And then it was just a matter of really cutting and sticking. So it's all pretty obvious what happens for the next little while. So rather than have to put up with my waffling on, I'll leave you with a bit of music, and you'll be easily able to follow what's happening. And if you were watching that really closely, you saw a very near miss. Let's have a look at it in slow motion. I was very lucky.
Missed it by that much.
The offcuts of the balsa wood are just to create the like 0.5 mil gap in the raised areas. I'll go back in later on with some fresh balsa wood to create a clean edge. Not a lot to say really, other than it's the Vallejo acrylic gloss varnish, and I find it comes quite nicely through the airbrush. I took this outside because it can get pretty messy, and really just gently hacked away at the edges and tried to sort of smooth and contour out a little bit. Used just a box cutter here just to get the vast majority of it sort of in shape. Then I use the saw that comes with the little mitre kit finished off with a bit of rough sandpaper just to get all the majorly loose pieces off and about, and a little bit of undulation on what will be the flat land. And here again, pretty obvious, I'm just marking up the balsa wood to create the clean edges for where the rose parts are. And now it was time to put the air dry clay on. I wanted this to be reasonably thin because I had a view that the base could be multi-purpose, and I thought I might be able to rearrange things like trees, etc. If the clay was thin over the foam, I might be able to just poke through in the future. Also comforting to know that this air dry clay is gluten free, so if you were feeling a bit peckish during the application, if you had a gluten intolerance, you could just hoe right in. I just used some really fine ballast to put down the road base, and then used some heavily watered down PVA glue to hold all that in place. Time to put the trees in now, and this is the intent is to have this look like just the edge of the forest onto a bit of a clearing, and with the road coming around the side. So the larger trees I put to the back with some of the smaller ones in the front. And then just chopped up a few along the way to add a little bit of shrubbery. Wasn't too worried about the look of it right now in terms of the colours, because they look a bit toy-like, but we'll whack some paint on them a little bit later on that will make them look a little less toy-like. In preparation for doing the ground cover, I like to mask off the already varnished edges. So I thought I'd try something here. I've sort of been experimenting with this plumber's nylon tape because it sticks, but it doesn't stick to the point where it leaves a residue. Now, I've used it on plastic in another project that you haven't yet seen, but that will come out in the not too distant future, and it works brilliantly on plastic. So I wasn't sure it would work all that well on timber, and as you can see, it took a lot of tape, so it's probably not really economical, and I ended up having to put the normal masking tape on it anyway because it was a bit loose around the edges. So not a great success. We'll have a look at it after everything's dried and all the tape comes off. I masked the other 3 edges just with the blue tape, and we'll see if we got any better results or not. So on with the staining of the balsa wood, which I put around as the clean edge for the elevated pieces. And again, just a couple of coats of this, being a little bit careful on the top edges, but not ridiculously careful because it's all matching in with the ground cover, which will have grass and the like over it. So just wanted to make it look neat and tidy more than anything. Balsa wood's very thirsty, so it sucks up the stain very, very quickly, and that's why a couple of coats helpful, just to make sure you get a really good depth of colour in it. And using just a pretty cheap craft acrylic paint to get the base colour down. Squirt a bit of that around, and using a fairly wet paintbrush, Spread it all over. So yeah, not too fussy or precious. Just get it down there. Well, especially in this case because it's largely going to be grass and trees. So this is just for any odd spot that might poke through. I stuck a fair few of those little clumpy grass tufts around, sort of a little bit more in the forest edge, and then some of the flatter ones deeper into what will be the open field. Just a little bit of PVA glue, push them down, and forget all about them. They stick. And then in between all the grass tufts, I put more PVA down and then started to sprinkle the grass cover. I didn't use any of the longer 3mm static grass because I want, again, the 1/72 scale. I wanted to keep it all pretty flat and low profile and just used a variety of different colours and shades, and actually went in a little bit later on with the airbrush and did a little bit more shading as well. Now, carving up the grass with what would be the track marks made sense to me in the context of this display, but with the ability to reflect over a couple of days when I looked at it, the more I looked at it, the less I liked it, and I realised that the reason I didn't like it was I never intended to do it. So this was always going to be a generic diorama display base, and I want to be able to show different vehicles from the Haladonian army on here in different scenarios. And whilst this makes sense with the 4 tanks being displayed, it wouldn't necessarily make sense later on. So you'll see there's a little bit of repair work to fix that up, which came out okay anyway. But a good lesson learned that I never intended to do this, but I allowed myself to forget what I wanted to achieve and just sort of spontaneously put in the track marks without thinking too much about why I was doing it. So here I'm just blending some different coloured grass to sprinkle along, and also some of the bits and bobs that came off the trees, which I used a little bit of, but not too much, just to break it up a little bit and give some variation. So I just wanted to take the toy look out of those trees, but I didn't want to do a huge amount of work, and I didn't want to try and paint every individual branch. So basically German black-brown paint, a bit of up skirting to a certain extent, up the trunk and as far as I could see without getting too much on the foliage. And that is good enough. It was good enough for me in this instance. So once we got the trees all done, a little bit of darker green on the foliage, and then a little bit of paint across the trees once they were in situ. Was really happy to be putting so many trees in. I don't know why. I think for us we typically only do one or two. It just felt really good to have the edge of the forest coming to life. So I'd put down the road base for the road initially and thought that I might just spray that. But it was a little bit low, and then the thought came to me that, well, if I have the bitumen over the top and you can see a little bit of the road base along the edges, that might look fairly authentic. So here I am just using some really fine ballast in two sort of slightly different sizes, a heap of PVA glue, a little bit of black paint to get some grey bitumen colouring, mixing it up really thoroughly, which looked quite good in the jar. And then effectively just troweled it on without having an actual trowel, of course. And tried to get it pretty level, but not phonetically level, and then just sort of poked away at a few pieces where there might be some ditches. What I found was it's really difficult in 1/72nd scale to hold back. So you sort of make ditches and mountains and rocks and that just habitually around about your eyes used to 1/35th. So the original ditch I made here was a bit too deep, and had to pull back from that a little bit and thin it out. And then once the road bitumen had dried, and I'd sprayed a clear dull coat over everything by this stage, just a matter of going with some pastels and some different coloured blacks and dark greys to get some variation there, and then sprinkled a whole bunch of it on and smoothed it all in. A little bit of pale grey to give some highlights, and then I used, which I sort of experimented with earlier, the graphite stick, just to get that sort of metallic-y look, which I'm not sure it comes up so well in the videos. I think there's still pictures to follow look better, but it looks really good in person because the sunlight catches it, and so you can get that metallic-y gleam. And that is about it, guys. So I'll leave you with some video and a few still pics, give you a better look at it, and then come back and say so long. So I hope you enjoyed that. Look, it's a 1/72nd scale display base. It's somewhere between just putting them on the shelf and a full-blown diorama. Hopefully you get some tips out of it. All the techniques are the same. So, building the frame and keeping the base light and then using the clay and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, really hope you got some value out of it. The next video will be the completed painted tanks. So we'll go through that. That'll be pretty quick because it's really not all that complicated. And getting the custom-made decals on. And final review there with maybe a little bit of a surprise video to come after all of that, to do with the adaptive camouflage system. So watch this space. Anyway, thanks for watching. As always, really appreciate you taking the time to do that. Like if you liked, sub if you're not already, so you can keep on top of everything. And as you know, really look forward to reading your comments. And we'll reply to all of them. So take care, guys, and I will catch you on the next one.